Coming up on Help Before You Sell.
The biggest pushback I get on people telling their story is they think that no one is going to be interested. But there's an experiential aspect of doing this.
The fundamental difference between Tolstoy and Chekhov and the like, the former are fiction. It's infinite. The story can be anything and can go anywhere. My story is my story.
It is a bit of a leap of faith. However you're helping before you sell, whether that's the podcast, an email sequence, or a book.
The best way to do that is in conversation with other people who can reflect with you. Like not getting a software tool that plunges it into an AI transcript that pulls out the best topics. In conversation with people is the best way.
Does marketing and content creation ever feel hard and time-consuming? What if it didn't have to be that way?
Join Rob Drummond,
Matthew Bliss,
and me, Pete Daly-Dixon, your ideal companions on the journey to a value-first approach to business growth, here on Help Before You Sell.
So I wanted to discuss my favourite marketing topic today, which is storytelling. I'm reading a book at the moment, so for the video version of this, you'll be able to see. It's called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by a English literature lecturer, effectively, called George Saunders. And what Saunders does in the book is he analyses a series of several short stories by 4 Russian authors, so Chekhov, Turgenev, Tolstoy, and Gogol. And he includes the short stories in the book and then an essay afterwards analysing what the story is doing. And he's got a section in here that just let me read, and he actually quotes another novelist called Milan Kundera. And Milan says, "Not only is the novelist nobody's spokesman, but I would go so far as to say he is not even the spokesman for his own ideas. When Tolstoy sketched the first draft of Anna Karenina, Anna was a most unsympathetic woman, and her tragic end was entirely deserved and justified. The final version of the novel is very different, but I do not believe that Tolstoy had revised his moral ideas in the meantime. I would say rather that in the course of writing, he was listening to another voice than that of his personal moral conviction. He was listening to what I would like to call the wisdom of the novel. Every true novelist listens for that superpersonal wisdom, which explains why great novels are always a little more intelligent than their authors. Novelists who are more intelligent than their books should go into another line of work." So this is my treatise, is that your story is more intelligent than you are at a deeper foundational knowing level. And sometimes that knowledge surfaces at 4 a.m. when you should be asleep or in the shower. But that's what the best stories are doing. It's communicating that intelligence that is deeper than maybe what you're able to rationalize in a logical arguments. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm wondering what practical impact that has for the listener who's thinking of writing an email sequence or thinking about recording a podcast episode or any other ways that they can help before they sell.
The biggest pushback I get on people telling their story is they think that no one is going to be interested in it. But there's an experiential aspect of doing this where it is a bit of a leap of faith to, however you're helping before you sell, whether that's the podcast, whether that's an email sequence or a book or whatever. Perhaps you're going out to networking meetings and you're leaning more into your story in that presentation that you do. I think some people come to me already convinced of the storytelling aspect and want to tell their stories. I think those people are relatively few. It's more common that I get business owners who have great stories but lack conviction and confidence in telling them and sharing them. And my argument really is that by sharing them, you not only build a human trusting connection, but you may also demonstrate something more intelligent than you are, because your story is more intelligent than you.
I guess the fundamental difference between the stories that you were talking about there with Tolstoy and Chekhov and the like, and us and the listener telling their story is that the former are fiction. So in some sense, the novelist, the author, has got scope, is that the word, to tap into something more, because it's infinite. The story can be anything and can go anywhere. But my story is my story. So how can I listen to some other kind of super intelligence? I don't know if that's what you're saying, but in order to make that story more intelligent than me, I'm kind of missing that bit, I think.
I mean, there's infinite stories. I mean, if you're writing a novel, there's infinite ways that you can take the novel and infinite things that you could include. But in terms of telling your story, there's also infinite things, infinite paths through that story. And what a story does is it both excludes a lot and picks a signal through a sequential happening of events. And in effect, in telling a story, you're saying these things matter because there is consequence in these events. I think what's also struck me reading Saunders' book is that when we're telling stories for business purposes, there's actually a more similarity with the short story format than there is with, say, screenwriting or with writing a novel. It's quite an efficient format where every paragraph really has to keep you reading the next paragraph. And I'd say that actually, of the stories that he's included in the book, there's one story where I've been like, nah, I'm not really into this. But all of the others have to work quite hard to capture your attention, keep your attention, and move you to an endpoint that isn't actually that far in the future. And I think for business purposes, we're not even writing short stories, we're writing kind of micro stories.
Yeah, I'm sitting back into this a little bit and kind of analogize it for myself from the philosophical perspective, because talking to the fictional component, I think knowing that the story is more intelligent than yourself is like the writers who say, "I let the characters guide me." Those kinds of people will roll up to interviews and say, "Well, the story is what it was because I was following the characters' feet in the direction they were heading." The advantage of being able to tell our own stories for our business marketing is that we're retracing our steps. We're not spinning up a brand new story, a new fictional element that could go in any direction. Like the decision fatigue of trying to come up with your own narrative that's different than what you've actually gone through. Like then it's not a process of reflection, it's a process of optimization to achieve your business aims, as opposed to having your business aims match your story, the experience of you getting to where you are today. And not only is that an efficiency, but it also makes the most sense because, I mean, in the parlance, you're not going to run into plot holes or needing to write away something that is contradictory in future in your marketing potentially. Like in podcasting, someone in particular on LinkedIn has pointed out, someone in an interview in 2021 said they had their first profitable quarter in a long time. And then in January this year, they said that they were celebrating five profitable years in a row. Well, those two things don't match up because you can't have your first profitable quarter in less than 5 years if you're saying you've had 5 profitable years. Like, it doesn't make sense. That kind of invention in the moment isn't part of your story. It's part of a business outcome. But if you have your story and that's the thing that you can match it to, it makes it easier to stay on message. None more importantly than because why you're here today is your story.
Pete, I was listening last night to your conversation with Renee for
Mm.
Not a Straight Line. That to me feels like, I mean, the reason that we keep coming back to Renee as well is because I think it probably is quite a pivotal story. There's almost like a natural overlap with your message of everyone deserves a second chance and everyone can grow and evolve and everyone has potential, and it's understanding that potential and what we call activating it. So there's quite a natural synergy there. But it would be one thing for you to just tell people about their potential and activating it, and it's quite another thing to go into Renee's story. I wondered if you could talk more on that.
Is that the kernel of your point, that the story is more intelligent. The story does a better job of explaining the point than just trying to explain the point. Is that?
Yeah, and it explains it. Well, perhaps it's the same point, but it explains it at a deeper, more emotional point of connection.
Mm.
And I think it very explicitly happens. Like anyone listening or watching this episode should go to Not a Straight Line, listen to Renee's episode, get towards the end, at the point where you ask the question, what can the listener do for you, Renee, right now
That's
to get you
amazing.
to where you want to be? And his answer is,
It's mic drop. It's like considering where he's come from and where he's been,
and the opportunities that he's missed for as long as he was incarcerated. Like, I won't spoil it here, listener.
No, please don't.
Watcher, make sure you go and have a listen or a watch. But suffice to say that his answer is epitomized by his journey. And you asking the question, setting up a container for him to fill with his story and the way he came there, that kind of captures that kernel.
I'm really glad you asked me that question, Rob, because I wasn't sure how I could possibly answer. But you asking me that question, that's given me the understanding that I had a mentor years ago say that anything that you want to say to someone, it was in a sales environment. So basically, it's talking about sales. But anything you want to say to a prospect listener, you can ask as a question. And I guess what we're saying here is that anything you want to say, you can tell a story about, and telling a story about it is going to have more of an impact than you just saying what it is that you want to say. So if you've got something to say in your business, then what is the story, either about you or about a client or about your product or whatever, that is going to communicate that point without you having to, like in acting language, is the subtext. You can communicate what you want to say at a, like you said, Rob, at a deeper level.
Only you get bored of telling the same story as well, which is why we stopped telling certain stories, because I feel like, So I've got a story that I tell about losing my passport and my money belt
God, not
on a
this
bus
story
in Colombia. So anyone who's in my world will like roll their eyes so hard they practically injure themselves, including me, because I feel like I've told it that many times. But then most people don't have that. It's only a very small section of my audience who will roll their eyes, but they're not going to like tip the desk upside down and go and unsubscribe straight away if they happen to hear it one more time, because they just don't pay that much attention. I think as well, I was thinking that when I used to go networking more a few years ago, obviously you listen to a lot of presentations, a lot of people introduce themselves. I cannot remember 99% of the people. I remember one guy giving a 10-minute presentation, and he told a story about how he was run over by a bus and survived. And I couldn't tell you now anything else about that guy's business, but I remember that he was the guy who got run over by a bus and survived, and he actually like limped into the room, and it obviously explained that story. But there was a connection to his purpose and why he does what he did with his work, and that kind of lodged itself in my brain. Like I remembered the story longer than I remembered him, or remembered his work, I guess. So I guess what I'm trying to get across is like there is a leap of faith initially, but then there's also an experiential aspect and a results aspect of like you do this, you gauge a response. Live events actually is a good way to test the ground, because when you can see, if you're in the same room as people, you can sense the vibration in the room, you can gauge the feedback. It's a good testing ground, I think. Emails and other kind of digital formats are fine as well, in terms of you get some indication in terms of click rates, open rates, and so on. But I think stories are kind of vibrational. So there is a testing ground if you can engineer it, perhaps even just like a live conversation that you have with someone.
There's an interesting component to it where you can't dismiss a story either. In the same way you can dismiss information and facts and figures. I can help you do this 5 times faster. Well, it's not actually 5 times. It's actually 4.275 times. I tested it. If you're saying I was hit by a bus in 2006 and that helped me realize the mission for my business, no one's going to sit there and go, it was actually a truck. They're going to resonate with the story.
The only way you can dismiss a story is if it stops resonating as true. So like what you were saying about that LinkedIn post where they're celebrating 5 years, well, they haven't been profitable for 5 years, and then they have their first profitable quarter. It's like, hang on a minute. As soon as the story doesn't ring true, but if you're telling stories from your past and you're being honest and authentic about it. There's a kind of array of related topics because it throws up questions of like, okay, so when do you stop telling your story and when do you start talking about your message and what's the correct ratio of story to message and so on and so forth. And perhaps we can get into that on future episodes. But I just wanted to kind of raise this as a thing where the biggest issue is a lack of self-confidence in your story. On my on the conversation that you and I had, Pete, for Not a Straight Line, I actually went into that. If I could, do you remember what I said to you kind of going into that conversation?
No.
I said that, interestingly, I don't actually think I've had that many zags in my story. And then we got into the conversation and I was like, holy shit, there's like zags everywhere here.
Welcome to my world.
So they will exist. And there will be a relevance to what you're doing today because there's a golden thread that runs across all of the events. You don't really change as a person in terms of the way that you think and the problems that you try to solve and the way that you try to help people and the impact that you want to have on the world. And that thread goes probably right back into your past.
And I can say, without danger of showing any whiskers, that listener, if you want help in,
Let me help you, Pete, because I was thinking the exact same thing.
thanks.
The great thing for a story, to have it is one thing. To be able to frame it appropriately in a way that someone can reflect the zigs and the zags back to you is another really great tool to have available to you. And the best way to do that is in conversation with other people who can reflect with you. Like not getting a software tool that plunges it into an AI transcript that pulls out the best topics and then reassembles it as you want it to. In conversation with people is the best way to frame your story if you're looking for guidance on how to do so.
Apart from anything else, it's making the time and creating the space to do that. So I have a regular container in the Not a Straight Line podcast that you can go to a website somewhere and ask to come on the podcast. And I don't care who you are, and provided that you're either an entrepreneur or an artist or both, I'll create the space and create the time and have a conversation with you and help you reflect and find the stories which you can then go off and tell to make the points that you want to make.
I keep coming back to the question of why do I keep coming back to storytelling in my work? Because I often think that I'm not really like the stereotypical storyteller that you might imagine holding court around a campfire to a captive audience. That is you, Pete. You are the holding court. In fact, I once went to an Infusionsoft partner event and didn't know you were there. And you were there in a corner, surrounded by about 15 other people, holding court, telling stories. I was like, that's Pete, yeah.
I resemble that remark.
Like that is not me. I'm much more introverted in my cave, but I think we're all storytellers because we're all human. And your story does matter because the people that you might work with in the future need to know that they can trust you. Just thinking of other specific tips. I mean, it has to be well structured and it has to be well delivered because the risk is that you don't want to sound like the crazy person on the bus who won't shut up and is telling random stories to people who don't really want to listen to it. Which is almost like the LinkedIn posts of someone who is telling you the sub story about how they were down to their last tin of baked beans and discovered this simple 5-step formula to riches, and you too can have the 5-step formula for $39.
Or a tin of beans.
That's crazy person on the bus territory. Don't go around or people just sharing personal stories. I think too early in the customer journey. So what I try to do with my clients is kind of tell stories early on, but you kind of want to focus on the problem that people are trying to solve because it's the problem that's going to get people's attention. Once you've got their attention, they then want to know, okay, who are you? Can I trust you?
Well, the reflective component is a tool for you to use as well. Like, ignoring the fact that it's a very therapeutic option. And there are a lot of ways for you to investigate your past experiences to frame them up so that you feel good about them where they may have been bad. Here, going through your story and analyzing it to a level that you understand what the message would be from that part of your story. Like for a long time, I had trouble explaining what I do because I explained what I've done, which was philosophy in, my bachelor's degree, which led to IT support, which led to curriculum development, which led to secondary teacher training, which led to IT training, which led to digital work. Like, all of that is a mouthful. That's what I did. It's not the story,
It's not the Socratic future.
No. And what's the message? Matt's done a lot of stuff and he can't pick one job.
I think at its essence is where I've got to with the Not a Straight Line is that ultimately so what you just went through there, Matt, is everything that you've done, but there's a lot of other people in the world that have had, those jobs and have accumulated. You weren't the only person going through that bachelor's degree in philosophy, but you are the only person that has experienced all of that with all of your other experiences and skills and knowledge and stuff that you've acquired. So ultimately you are the value. It's you. And the easiest way of you expressing your value is in the stories that you tell, not in what you say about yourself.
Because people come to their own conclusion then. People own that understanding rather than you owning the understanding.
Yeah. And the answer there is I watched The Matrix at a friend's place, which made me interested in philosophy, which led to the bachelor's degree. But also in that time, intrapersonal reflection was really important. And my parents didn't like weird questions. So I was very internal and introspective for the first 15 years of my life. Like, that's a bit more story to it, rather than just saying all the things I did.
I'm beginning to realize that The Matrix was both a philosophical film and a documentary. But
and on that note,
another episode.
Just to round off with a more practical tip, if someone has a message that they're trying to get across and you want it, you've got a story, perhaps you've got this far through the episode, you've got a story in mind, you want some practical advice on how to tell that story, try to think of the chronological events across the story and pick 3 to 5 events or turning points in that story of things that happen. And there should be a mix of good things and bad things. Most advertisements, for instance, only ever talk about good things happening, and it's dull, it's boring as a result. So try to limit it to just 3 to 5 beats in the story. And then you want to end on a very specific point. So for Pete's story, talking to Renee, that end point was everyone deserves a second chance. If that's the last thing you say in the story, that's what the story is about. So that constraint helps you structure the story and leave the reader with the impression or the idea that then connects to your message.
Yeah. And you're not going to get there like that.
No. You might have to work at it. You might have to go out and tell it. You might have to go out and tell it a few times. Take yourself off to a networking meeting. Force yourself to do a 10-minute presentation, and you'll get that benefit out of it, even if you don't get any work directly from the networking meeting.
And go to one 50 miles away, so no one knows you. If that helps.
But people are so afraid to do the work by themselves. Like, I'm seeing a lot of podcasters come out now and say that their tip is just sit down and record yourself for 10 minutes a day. That's how you get the confidence to speak on mic. Like, some people need an audience to be able to push themselves to the level where they need to practice that. So maybe that's a really good practical tip to take on to push yourself to do it.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Help Before You Sell, sponsored by Activate Your Podcast. To activate your podcast and help the people who most need you and your services, head to activateyourpodcast.com/help. If you found this episode helpful, please also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And remember, help more to sell more. See you next time.